What if I told you that three men, armed with little more than a smile and a complete disregard for the truth, managed to build billion-dollar empires on a foundation of pure fiction? They didn't use guns or elaborate heists. They used spreadsheets, press releases, and the one weapon that never ever fails: greed. These men fooled regulators, charmed the world's sharpest investors, and lived like royalty, all while their companies were rotting from the inside out. This is the story of how they pulled it off, and how it all came crashing down, wiping out fortunes and shattering thousands of lives in the process. Deception 1. The telecom cowboy Bernard Devers and WorldCom. Our first story kicks off with a guy who perfected the image of a simple, down-to-earth leader. Bernard Devers, better known as the telecom cowboy, was famous for wearing blue jeans and boots to board meetings instead of a suit and tie. He started with a tiny long-distance company in Mississippi back in 1983, and through one aggressive acquisition after another, built it into the telecommunications giant WorldCom. By the late 1990s, WorldCom was a titan, the second largest long-distance provider in the US, with a market value that peaked at a staggering $185 billion. Investors adore Devers. He was a straight-talking, empire-building man who seemed to have the golden touch in the red-hot tech world. But behind the folksy charm and country boy act was a massive secret. As the dot-com bubble began to hiss and pop at the turn of the millennium, WorldCom's profits started to vanish. The intense pressure to keep hitting Wall Street's ridiculous expectations pushed Devers and his top brass to commit a breathtakingly simple fraud. Here's how it worked. In the world of accounting, you have got two basic kinds of expenses: operating costs, your day-to-day bills like salaries and supplies, and capital expenditures, which are long-term investments like buildings or equipment. Operating costs hit your profits immediately. Capital costs can be spread out over years. So what did WorldCom do? Company accountants started taking billions of dollars in everyday operating costs and just pretended they were long-term investments. It's like telling your spouse you didn't spend any money on takeout this month because you're reclassifying your pizza receipts as a long-term investment in culinary infrastructure. It's absurd, but on a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet, the lie was hidden in plain sight. This one simple trick inflated WorldCom's assets by about $11 billion. For 5 quarters, the company reported huge profits when it was actually losing money hand over fist. The whole house of cards came tumbling down in the summer of 2002. An internal audit team, led by a gutsy vice president named Cynthia Cooper, started digging. Working in secret, often at night, she and her team uncovered the fraudulent entries. When she confronted the chief financial officer, he told her to back off. She refused. Cooper took her findings to the board's audit committee, and the scam exploded into the open. The fallout was catastrophic. WorldCom filed for what was then the largest bankruptcy in US history. Its stock collapsed from over $60 a share to literal pennies, vaporizing the life savings of countless employees and investors. Bernard Devers pleaded ignorance, claiming he just didn't understand all that complicated accounting stuff. A jury didn't buy the "aw-shucks" routine. He was found guilty of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The telecom cowboy, who built an empire on a lie, didn't ride off into the sunset. He rode off to a prison cell. He was released in late 2019 due to failing health and died just over a month later, in February 2020. Section 2. The smartest guys in the room: Kenneth Lay and Enron. If the WorldCom fraud was a simple con, our next case was a work of art in its complexity, painted by men who were celebrated as geniuses. Welcome to Enron. Founded by Kenneth Lay in 1985, Enron started as a humble natural gas pipeline company but morphed into a sprawling energy trading Goliath. By 2000, it was the 7th largest company in America, and its leaders, Ken Lay and CEO Jeffrey Skilling, were hailed as visionaries who were practically inventing the future. Their con was built on 2 brilliant crooked pillars. The first was an accounting method called mark-to-market. In simple terms, this let Enron Book the potential future profits from a long-term deal as actual income today. Think about it. You build a lemonade stand and sign a deal to sell 1 cup of lemonade a day for the next 20 years. Mark-to-market accounting lets you claim all 20 years of profit right now, before you've even squeezed a single lemon. It created the illusion of incredible profitability, even if the real cash wasn't due for years or would never show up at all. The second pillar was even darker, the use of thousands of off-the-books shell companies, called Special Purpose Entities, or SPES. These were created by CFO Andrew Fastow for one primary reason: to hide the mountains of debt Enron was racking up. Enron would essentially sell its debt to these shell companies, magically wiping it from its own balance sheet and making the company look far healthier and less risky than it actually was. For years, Wall Street was obsessed with Enron, but in 2001, the magic started to fail. A few skeptical reporters, most famously Bethany McLean at Fortune magazine, started asking a very simple question: how does Enron actually make its money? No one could give a straight answer. As the questions got louder, the truth started to crawl out. When the world finally saw the hidden debt and fake profits, Enron's stock cratered, plunging from over $90 to less than $1 in a few months. On December 2, 2001, the company filed for bankruptcy. The human toll was devastating. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings, which were overwhelmingly tied up in now worthless Enron stock. The scandal was so massive it even took down Arthur Andersen, one of the world's biggest accounting firms, which was found guilty of obstruction of justice for shredding Enron documents. Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling were convicted in 2006 on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Lay died of a heart attack before he could be sentenced, which legally resulted in his conviction being wiped. Skilling was sentenced to 24 years, though it was later reduced, and he was released in 2019. The smartest guys in the room had outsmarted everyone but themselves, leaving behind a legacy of ruin and a landmark set of laws, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, designed to prevent a disaster like this from ever happening again. Deception 3. The Man Who Was Wall Street, Bernie Madoff. Our last story is maybe the most terrifying because the fraud wasn't just inside a complex corporation. The fraud was the corporation, and the man behind it all wasn't some rogue outsider. He was the ultimate insider, Bernard L. Madoff. Madoff was a Wall Street legend, a former chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. He ran an investment firm that was the picture of prestige. For decades, he cultivated an aura of genius and exclusivity, delivering steady, solid returns year after year, whether the market was up or down. You couldn't just give him your money. You had to be invited to be his client. He managed fortunes for the ultra-wealthy, for celebrities, and for major charities. To his thousands of clients, Bernie Madoff wasn't a money manager. He was a sure thing. But here's the secret to Madoff's impossible success. There was no success. There were no genius investments. There was no secret trading algorithm. In fact, for years, there were barely any trades at all. Madoff was running the biggest and longest Ponzi scheme in history. The concept is ancient and viciously simple. You pay returns to your old investors using the cash you get from new investors. As long as fresh money keeps pouring in, the illusion of profit holds. Madoff's firm was just a giant machine for shuffling cash. He'd deposit client money into a single bank account, and when someone wanted a payout, he'd pay them from that same account, which had just been topped up by a new wave of investors. The fancy account statements showing stocks being bought and sold. Pure fiction. For decades, it worked flawlessly. But then came the 2008 global financial crisis. The markets cratered and investors, desperate for cash, started asking for their money back. Suddenly, way more people were asking for withdrawals than were putting new money in. The tidal wave of redemption requests hit a level Madoff couldn't handle. The scheme was finally collapsing under its own weight. On December 10, 2008, Madoff confessed everything to his two sons, who worked at the firm but were apparently unaware of the true nature of his business. He told them his investment arm was one big lie. The next day, they went to the authorities, and Bernie Madoff was arrested. The scale of the fraud was mind-boggling. Fictitious account statements claimed clients had holdings worth nearly $65 billion. The actual cash losses were estimated at around $20 billion. The fallout was a human tragedy on a global scale. Retirees lost everything. Charities and universities were bankrupted overnight. Lives were destroyed. In a heartbreaking turn, Madoff's son, Mark, died by suicide exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. In 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies and was sentenced to the maximum of 150 years in prison. He died in a federal prison hospital in April 2021. Unlike the others, Madoff's scam wasn't about propping up a failing company. It was a direct, personal, decades-long theft from people who trusted him with their lives. And the stories of Evers, Lay, and Madoff are obviously tales of staggering greed. But they're also cautionary tales about the irresistible power of a good story. Whether it was the story of the simple telecom cowboy, the genius Enron visionaries, or the unbeatable Wall Street guru, thousands of brilliant people chose to believe. They prove a timeless and deeply uncomfortable truth, that even the smartest among us can fall for the most outrageous lies, especially when those lies promise us exactly what we want to hear. These billion-dollar deceptions are a brutal reminder that in the world of high finance, trust, once it's broken, can make fortunes disappear in the blink of an eye. If you found this look into the dark side of finance as fascinating as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest stories in business and crime, and let us know in the comments, what financial scandal should we unravel next? Thanks for watching.